Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen von Hippel. I'm the director here at RUSI, and it's on behalf of the Center for Policy Studies, Tim Knox in the front row, and RUSI, it's our pleasure to welcome you here tonight to hear Lord Saatchi present his treatise, Eutopia. Last I looked, there were still 8% uncommitted, and we have about a week to go, so you have a chance to sway that 8%, and presumably people on either side tonight. So we're looking forward to hearing that. I think most of you know Lord Saatchi's background, but I'll just run through a few highlights. He's the chairman of the Center for Policy Studies with Dr. Tim Knox here in the front, and has consistently argued that idealism and vision, and not pragmatism, are prerequisites for political success, and I think we'll hear a bit about that tonight. In his pamphlet from 2001 that many of you know, Poor People Stop Paying Tax, he was the first to argue that the income tax threshold should be increased to £10,000 when at the time it was at £4,500. And at the time it was written off as being unrealistic, and of course, as we all know today, it's part of the political landscape in this country. He's a co-founder of Saatchi & Saatchi and now a partner in MNC Saatchi, and their work since 1979, you can't read my notes, for the Conservative Party has been widely recognized as being influential and, of course, groundbreaking in many ways. He was elevated to the peerage in 1996 and has served on the Conservative front bench in the House of Lords as Shadow Minister for the Treasury and the Cabinet Office between 1999 and 2003. And he was chairman of the Conservative Party from 2003 to 2005. Now, before I ask Lord Saatchi to take the stage, just to point out, we have about an hour here. He will speak for about 30 minutes, and we have 30 minutes for really good Q&A from the audience. Looking forward to that. And then, for those of you who are interested, you're welcome to join us for a drink upstairs in the library. Lord Saatchi will need a well-deserved drink, I'm sure, after all the grueling questions from this audience. We are recording it, but it's not live streamed, right? Yeah, that's correct. And the entire evening is on the record. So it's not normal RUSI House rules when half is on the record and half is not. All is on the record, right?
Good.
Okay, without further ado, Lord Saatchi, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to tell you that tonight the Iron Duke and the Iron Lady meet because the Duke of Wellington founded RUSI, and Mrs. Thatcher, of course, founded the Centre for Policy Studies. So they have come together as the founders of Britain's two great think tanks this evening, and the fraternal relations which exist between RUSI and the CPS are very important to both bodies, and I'm sure will flourish. Thank you, Dr. von Hippel, for arranging this evening at RUSI. We're greatly honoured to be here, and thank you all. I can see many board members of the CPS and RUSI here, and thank you to all our friends and supporters in both organisations. I am particularly delighted to be able to say that we have here in the Wellington Hall none other than the Duke of Wellington himself. And it's a marvellous thing that the Duke of Wellington is here. He's just been re-elected by acclamation by his peers to return to the House of Lords. And if you will join me. So tonight I am going to bring you, and to all the living rooms and dining tables of Britain, because I certainly expect that all television programmes tonight will be interrupted to bring the news to a grateful nation. Let me begin. The heading here is Utopia, and I put the case that a map of the world which does not include Utopia is not worth looking at. So said Oscar Wilde, and I agree. So let me draw you a map of Utopia with an E, where Britain has taken its rightful place as the natural leader of Europe, and give you the directions for how to get there. In an hour, I'm going to send you skipping out along Whitehall, like the child who has just blown out his birthday candles and made a wish. Yet, there is no British citizen who has heard of this idealist possibility that I'm going to now describe. Instead, in this EU referendum, we're faced with two dismal alternatives. Both are unacceptable. To remain is too frustrating. To leave is too frightening. So no wonder we, the people, are ambivalent, split 50-50 right down the middle. That is a logical response when human beings are asked to choose the lesser of two evils. Remain, a little cog in the European machine. No control at all. Not of our borders, not of our laws. Who wants that? Or leave, a little island on the edge of Europe. No money, no jobs. Who wants that? This ambivalence, my friends, has already lasted for decades. Professor Anthony King captured it years ago. The British people prefer cooperation to integration, but integration to isolation. So, it's time to move on. We need a completely different approach. So, now I'm going to try and answer two simple questions. First, how did we get into this mess? Answer, too much pragmatism. And how are we going to get out of it? More idealism. Idealism is, I put to you, essential for teenagers and teachers, prime ministers and presidents alike. The record seems to show that idealism is not only more inspiring than realism, it's also more powerful. Individuals who lack the idealism to express their hopes and dreams have a poor prognosis. I put it to you that whether you want to be in control of an army or a political party, a company, a country, the whole world, or just yourself, you're better off to follow St. Paul. I'm grateful to Canon White for pointing this out. St. Paul, always pressing onward to the upwards call. A further dose of pragmatism is the last thing we need. So first I have to cleanse your mind of all traces of pragmatism. This is not brainwashing. This is dry cleaning. Now, we hear a lot about sovereignty these days, but to those who have no objection to the English language, what the word means is, who's in charge? What we want is utopia. The benefits of this big trading bloc that President Obama likes so much, without the price that goes with it, a subordinate, a supplicant, a mere courtier. You may say that's a fantasy, a dream, childish candle blowing. Really. So, how did Germany's dream come true? German children blew out the candles and made a wish too. Ashes to ascendancy, dust to dominance. Their wish came true. How on earth did they do it? Winston Churchill advised, the further backwards you look, the further forwards you can see. So, buoyed up by the Russian proverb, if you live in the past, you'll lose an eye, and encouraged by Solzhenitsyn's amendment of it, if you ignore the past, you'll lose both eyes. Let me take you back to the beginning. In accordance with the first economic law, the economies of scale, Germany sought greater scale through reunification. The greater the volume, the lower the cost of production, the lower the cost, the lower the price, the lower the price, the higher the sales. It's not complicated at all. Germany understood basic economics. We didn't. British diplomats followed the exact reverse strategy in the name of pragmatism. They planned to break up Britain into smaller, bite-sized pieces, the easier for the EU to digest. Scottish smoked salmon for the starter, Welsh rarebit for dessert, and for the main course, English roast beef. While we were worrying about the menu, the Germans ate our lunch. There are many examples of fine diplomacy by the British Foreign Office across the road. The EU is not one of them. In this pamphlet, which I now hold up, which is for sale at a very reasonable price as you leave, The Great Overtake. It contains a brilliant analysis by the CPS economist and great expert on this subject, Daniel Mahoney, of everything which I'm about to describe. In that pamphlet, CPS experts agree with the OECD that the indisputable demographic trends mean Britain will soon have a bigger population than Germany and a bigger economy. Obviously, therefore, Britain should now prepare to take its natural place as the leader of Europe. Have a look at these two charts. I'll put them up very quickly. Let's look at. This is a staggering change in the working age population. That means people who are actually at work. It excludes people who are retired. Look at the drop in Germany and the rise in Britain. Let's go to the next. That was population. This is GDP. This is according to the OECD, confirmed by the CPS economists. There you are. The overtake, the great overtake, is in 2032. I believe, actually, at 6:27 p.m. on the 29th of August, to be exact. Thank you. So, let me paint you a picture. Particularly, I hope this will mean something to you, Dr. Hippel, and to all your colleagues from RUSI. I'd like to tell you what leadership looks like. It was described by the historian Corelli Barnett, I think, very beautifully. I'll read it. It'll only take a second. For the British people, the official VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, on the 9th of May 1945, marked the occasion of proud remembrance of their long struggle from early defeat through to this ultimate victory. The only Allied nation to fight Nazi Germany from first to last. Once again in their history, they had won as they had always assumed they would. Outside Buckingham Palace, citizens came together under a pale May sun to cheer their sovereign, to shout, "We want the king!" When George VI, in the uniform of an admiral of the fleet, appeared on the balcony with the Queen and the two princesses, his subjects responded by roaring out, "For he's a jolly good fellow!" Then at about 5:30, Winston Churchill joined the royal family in a fresh appearance on the balcony. The crowds roared again, and the film cameras recorded it all for the nation at large to see on the newsreels. The first minister of the Crown who brought the realm safely through the greatest peril in its history. On Sunday, the 14th of May, the King and Queen rode out in a landau to St. Paul's for the national service of thanksgiving, just as Queen Anne had ridden out to St. Paul's to give thanks for Marlborough's great victories 2.5 centuries earlier. In the cathedral, where Wellington and Nelson lay in the crypt, the Archbishop of Canterbury preached the sermon. The anthem reverberated up into Sir Christopher Wren's majestic vaults. It was no wonder that at such a time and in such a mood, the British took it for granted that Great Britain was and would always remain a first-class world power. Her formidable armed forces, Dr. von Hippel, ranked her with Soviet Russia and the United States in the big three that had waged and won the war against Nazi Germany. Her Prime Minister would attend a forthcoming tripartite summit to decide the future of Europe. And here we are in the Wellington Room. The role played by Wellington and Castlereagh at the Congress of Vienna in 1814-15 and by Lloyd George at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. So that's leadership. So what happened? Since that summer's day in 1945, British diplomacy's lack of idealism left a void for Germany to fill. Since then, the British Foreign Office response has been entirely pragmatic. If at the time it's best to go in, we will. If at the time it's better to come out, we will. No principles are involved. Who's to blame? It's always nice to have someone to blame. I blame the fine virtue of pragmatism. I won't read out Edmund Burke, who I condemn here for his advice to conservatives, sorry to you all, to concentrate on what is, not what should be. So that's not it at all. Or one could blame Michael Oakeshott, another Tory hero, when giving the inaugural address on assuming the professorship of political science at the London School of Economics. In political activity, he said, men sail a boundless and bottomless sea. There is neither harbour for shelter nor floor for anchorage, neither starting place nor appointed destination. The enterprise is to keep afloat on an even keel. Alan Bennett probably captured it best in his masterpiece, An Englishman Abroad. Say what you like, the English are not interested in ideas. You could shove a whole slice of the Communist Manifesto into the Queen's speech and nobody would turn a hair, least of all HMQ. Meantime, and this is the point, German diplomacy made a plan and executed it with precision. They had what is called Weltanschauung, a world view. The result? Nightly news across Europe now reports Germany will decide. In the end, Mrs. Merkel will decide. For the Germans, reunification was emotional, as in the word Heimat, which means homeland. It was also a question of power. Germany had a plan, it stuck to it, and it worked. In the original EU Steel and Coal Federation, there were 6 members. Voting was on the basis of one country, one vote. But after reunification, Germany succeeded in persuading others that this was undemocratic. It would be more democratic if voting strength could be related to population. One citizen, one vote. France had a plan too, and it stuck to it, and it worked. France heeded Chancellor Kohl's warning. In a speech he gave in Louvain in 1996, the German Chancellor borrowed from Hamlet. I have something in me dangerous, which let thy wiseness fear. Ask that in France, and you will get a straight answer. 1 million men lost in 1914-18, not one French family escaped. That is why French President Mitterrand advised, nationalism is war. German Chancellor Kohl always stressed the basic point of the EU, integration is a question of war and peace. The French made the decision to create the Franco-German alliance, which has been leading Europe ever since, as we know. At first, the British Foreign Office was alarmed by the prospect of German domination of Europe. Chancellor Kohl tried to reassure Mrs. Thatcher, but she was unconvinced about German motives. We want a European Germany, but we don't want a German Europe. Just in case, the British Foreign Office developed a brilliant answer, for which one must take one's hat off to them. Enlargement. So Germany plans to run 6 countries. Let's see how they do with 26 countries. But German officials saw that coming. Successive generations of German diplomats were much too smart for that. They took the plan forward in 3 astounding maneuvers. First, the reunification, then the Treaty of Nice, then the Treaty of Lisbon. Germany's plan unfolded. 1, 2, 3. 1, the reunited Germany to have the biggest population in the EU. 2, voting to be changed to reflect population weight. 3, the EU voting threshold to pass EU law to be reduced. 3 simple steps to effective control of Europe. The British Foreign Office was asleep at the wheel. When Britain joined the EU in 1973, it was on a one country, one vote basis. Britain was an equal partner, had an equal share of the votes. In the EU Treaty of Nice, as amended by the EU Treaty of Lisbon, that principle of equality ended. Now votes would depend on population, so Germany would outvote Britain for the first time. The long-held dream of German diplomacy had come true. One expert on European politics in Brussels called Germany's new voting strength, I'm quoting, a major geopolitical development in the history of the Union. Under the old qualified majority voting rules for the Council of the European Union, Germany, France, Italy and Britain all had the same power. Under the new system, votes in the Council will be based on population. I think I'm going to spare you these details. They're all contained in the pamphlet that's outside, but I think they bear out the detail of what I'm describing. For example, economists at the University of Geneva said that the dramatic reduction in the threshold to pass EU law would make it much easier to pass legislation under the new system. For example, when the UK joined the EEC in 1973, Britain controlled 56% of the total number of votes needed to block legislation. At Nice, it was reduced to 33%. Under the constitution that was proposed, our share would have fallen to 31% of the votes needed to block legislation. The Franco-German axis, meanwhile, would have 73.5% of votes needed to block legislation. The European, how shall I want to try and skip over this quite quickly. The new voting method, which was included in the constitutional treaty, was confirmed in the Lisbon Treaty, Article 16 TEU/Article 238 TFEU, although slightly modified. The new system focuses, as I said, on the demographic weight of member states. If at this point anyone is thinking this is all sort of like tedious figures, I think Lord Strathclyde nods. I think that this is like Yes Minister on a global scale, because these changes, which went through in a small way and over a period of time, transformed the situation in terms of Britain in Europe. Could we look at this next chart? Well, this is also astounding, and I don't think anyone knows this. The green is where the votes shares were. And if you look at Germany, you will see that Germany's vote share doubled from 8% to 16%, while ours sort of went up a bit. But for the first time, instead of being equal, we're now below. Should we look at the next chart? Which just shows you the exact figures. In the old voting system, this change came about in November 2014, very recently, and I think without any coverage or understanding in Britain at all. Under the old voting system, there are the shares, all the same, 8.2%. In the new system, based on population, Germany is at 16%, we're at 12%. Thank you very much. I'm not going to take you through all these points in these articles. I think you may know them. Some of them are astonishing to read. Yes. Let's just take this from the Constitution. The Constitution shall have primacy over the law of the member states. Member states shall facilitate the achievement of the Union's tasks and refrain from any measure which could jeopardize the attainment of the objectives set out in the Constitution. Or if you prefer in terms of RUSI's world, the Common Foreign and Security Policy. Member states shall actively and unreservedly support the Union's common foreign and security policy in a spirit of loyalty and mutual solidarity. They shall refrain from action contrary to the Union's interests. Or you could consider Article 10. It introduces us to a new use of the English word competence, which we usually take to mean ability, but in fact means jurisdiction, and helpfully sets out who will have jurisdiction over what. I'll end with this. When the Constitution when the Constitution confers on the Union exclusive competence in specific areas, only the Union may legislate and adopt legally binding acts, the member states being able to do so themselves only if so empowered by their Union. The member states shall exercise their competence only if and to the extent that the Union has not exercised its. So, this is what we recall French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing meant when he described his dream for Europe. It will be respected and listened to as a political power that will speak as an equal with the largest powers on the planet. I'm going to skip over the EU's Financial Services Action Plan. This is the creation of a single market in financial services, but if you were to read this, you would see that the legislative and economic momentum that exists in the EU is enormous. And on our part, we have only had a series of short-term decisions for the British people to make. In 1975, go in or stay out. In 2016, remain or leave. It's hardly the stuff that dreams are made on, is it? The Foreign Office consistently underestimated Britain's power in Europe. Respect for its culture, the arts, financial propriety, my word is my bond, an incorruptible criminal justice system, the police, the Royal Law Courts, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, non-violent protest, the history of the empire, its present Commonwealth, a scientific, literary and medical legend which stood alone against the might of Germany. Compared with that CV, everyone else might understandably feel second class. I think I'm going to skip over this. Dante described 500 years ago what all this means in terms of what they call sovereignty, whether a person can be in charge of their own fate. Here's what he said. 1459. Mankind at its best depends upon unity in the wills of its members. The Scythians, for instance, live outside the seventh circle, experience extreme inequalities of day and night, and endure an almost intolerably piercing frost. They require a different rule from the Garamantes, who live in the equinoctial zone, where the days and nights are of equal duration and where the excessive heat makes it unbearable to wear clothes. But our meaning is that mankind should be directed by a common law issuing from one supreme prince and applied to those characteristics which are common to all men. And the British people, as diligent Dante scholars, understand very well there are certain things in life you don't want, but to which you have to bow your head. As usual, we the people are miles ahead of the politicians. We see the EU for what it is, another symbol of global capitalism. We see mega mergers and global corporate alliances every day. We see jobs moving away to wherever it suits global corporations to employ people. We don't need a professor of economics from LSE or a chancellor of the Exchequer from across the road to teach us this. We know it all perfectly well, because our employers are teaching us every day that unity is strength, e pluribus unum, the strong go forward, the weak go to the wall, only a few will survive. For good or ill, politics follows economics. If companies feel that their employees are safer and better off in a global organisation, then politicians will follow suit, believing their citizens to be safer and better off in a regional alliance. Where shall I take you through to? Yes, I think we should just try and deal with... we all know what the criticism of the EU are, and there's one mysterious aspect which I think I should touch on before I end. Must we accept this homogenised EU version of reality, which so many people so dislike? Some British Eurosceptics pin their hopes on America coming to our rescue. But this is a forlorn hope. The last American president of the 20th century did not mention the word euro once in any speech he ever made. The latest American president of the 21st century, as we all know, said, "Go to the back of the queue." Why? Why is America so in love with the EU? This US president knows perfectly well that anti-Americanism has helped to create a unified European voice in which an increasingly assertive Europe will challenge the United States on every issue it can, because anti-Americanism helps Europeans gain respect in the rest of the world. The president certainly heard the governor of the European Central Bank point out that America accounts for only 30% of world trade, I'm quoting, yet 70% of the world's business is transacted in dollars. This injustice to the new European superpower would be put right by the euro, he said. The French government now makes crystal clear, and one must acknowledge its consistency, that its aim is to create a big country called Europe to rival a big country called America. When French President de Gaulle built an independent French nuclear force, and began, and Dr. von Hippel certainly knows, and began to construct the Franco-German alliance, President Kennedy expressed American concerns, quoting, "If the French and other European powers acquire a nuclear capability, they would be in a position to be entirely independent, and we might be on the outside looking in." So if the President and the administration understand that the point of the EU is to challenge America, why does America go along with it? The answer is, as I'm virtually quoting, if we can stop all these countries fighting each other, that will save us money. No boots on the ground in Europe, plus as a bonus they can pay for their own defence. And if that isn't sufficient, there is the question of commerce. American multinational corporations welcome the EU and campaign for it. Why wouldn't they? It's the last step in integrating their European units, a path they've been following for 30 years at least, along a continuum from loose coordination to complete integration. This is the view of the US bosses. I'm paraphrasing, but this is it. In our European division, we have 500 million consumers. But in Europe, we have all these different countries, all these different people, all with their different habits, their own practices, all with their own little customs. How tedious they are. If only these people were more similar, you say, then instead of having 6 factories in 10 countries with 4 R&D facilities, 32 products in 62 package sizes, we could have 2 plants, 1 R&D facility, and produce 3 standardized products for the whole of Europe. Think of the cost savings. So all these American CEOs, multinational CEOs, concluded a long time ago that if you don't do things globally, someone else will. But wait, perhaps it's China that will save us. That is unlikely. The Chinese government has said, I'm quoting a spokesperson, it would prefer it if the EU were, I quote, one country with one government. Why? More efficient. We prefer to deal with the United States of America. In the EU, there are too many cooks. We, the people, don't doubt the economic power of globalization, but we find that the word has a menacing ring that we have accepted, haven't we? That in the end, these global corporations are not driven by greed, but by fear. In The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin noted the fierce competition between and within the species in nature. He observed that in birds, for example, the bones of the face, the curvature of the jaw, the number of ribs, the gape of the mouth, the length of the eyelids, the width of the nostrils, the size of the beak, the manner of flight, all varied remarkably. And in what Darwin called their incessant struggle for survival, he described the process we know of natural selection. Those with an advantage go forward, for the rest extinction inevitably follows. The laws of Darwinism apply as inexorably and ruthlessly in commerce as they do in nature. That's why to oppose globalization in economics is as futile as opposing Darwin in nature. I'm going to spare you Isaiah Berlin on the American vision, but just let me come to the end as we're running out of time. So now we have, as a result of all I've told you, the European Union with the full blessing of both of the world's two superpowers, America and China. For most global corporations doing the math, Britain is a rounding error. You cannot defy economic Darwinism, so the only question now worth asking is, who's in charge? We want more control of this EU. We deserve it. We must have it. Why? Because we're worth it. At the moment, the only way anyone can think of to get it is to leave. But I bring joyous news. We are on the road to Utopia. CPS economists agree with the OECD, in the way you just saw. Britain will soon be the number one economic power in Europe. That's the news. It's very close. So let me end with what I'm asking the Prime Minister to do here. The Prime Minister deserves to win this referendum, and he will, on one condition, of which he is aware. That on the morning after his victory on the 24th of June, he calls in the Foreign Secretary from across the road to number 10 and asks to see his plan for Britain's leadership of Europe. What are we going to do between now and then, Foreign Secretary? What will we do when we get there, Foreign Secretary? The Prime Minister will insist that the Foreign Office plan has the following mandatory inclusions: a consistent strategic focus, a distinct reason for being, a definite sense of direction, a noble purpose, a destination to be reached, and a marching tune people can respond to. When this referendum ends, the Prime Minister's work begins. He tried with his renegotiation, an honourable failure. But his heart was in the right place. He took the first step on a long journey. This is not a job for pragmatism or a whistle-stop tour of European fine dining tables. It is as it was for Germany. The work of a generation, maybe several. It will take quite a while. Let him start now. See the future, recognise it, plan for it. Let him, his heirs and successors, show the people of Europe what Britain has to offer as their leader. This is the very least we should expect to hear from the British Prime Minister on the TV news. I'll read. Today, this is the news story we're waiting for. Today, the British Prime Minister changed the course of European history. Taking advantage of French economic and social weakness, the Prime Minister has forged the long-awaited and much-predicted Anglo-German alliance, which from today replaces the Franco-German alliance as the engine driver of Europe. That's only the start. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Saatchi. Not only was it visionary, as I indicated at the start, but it was also very provocative.
Good.
RUSI, as I forgot to mention in the beginning, RUSI does not take a view on this debate, but we're delighted to be hosting arguments that on both sides. And this is a very different tack than we've had in the past, so we're really happy to have you here today. And I encourage everyone to read this paper. It's very interesting. So I think I'm going to open up Q&A, and please introduce yourself. Do we have microphones?
We do.
Yeah, we do. Okay, wonderful. So please introduce yourself.
Dominic Dawson, columnist for the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail and Standpoint. Characteristically elegant, Maurice, thank you very much. One minor point, by the way, in 1975 it wasn't go in or stay out, we were already in. It was the same question as we have now, just on a minor point of fact. The other thing I'd like to say is that on Darwin said survival of the most adaptable. And I think that's a very good lesson, that the EU is not adaptable. It is a Darwinian disaster. Okay, so just on those two trivial points. You said that there was no one else who tried this leader in Europe stuff. Actually, there was. His name was Tony Blair. He was absolutely committed to it. That was why he had the idea of having no transitional arrangements when we took the accession countries. He wanted to demonstrate that he was in the vanguard of the European idea, which he was. That was why he wanted to go into the euro and was blocked from Gordon Brown. Not because Gordon Brown thought it was economically bad, it was because Tony Blair wanted it. And it would be loss of power to the British Chancellor as well. Tony Blair, though, was right, that if you want to lead in Europe, you have to be in the euro, you have to be part of the project. He was entirely consistent. I'm not saying I agree with him, but it was a sensible strategy from that point of view. The idea that you can lead in Europe when you're not part of the Eurozone, I'm afraid, is utopia. It is moonshine. And that is why, when there was the whole dispute over I'm sorry to go on so much, over the euro, Sarkozy said to Cameron, you're always criticising what we're doing. It was in the FT, it was leaked. You have missed a very good opportunity to keep your mouth shut. And that is the position, that is how they will treat us. And finally, in Cameron, I agree with you, the renegotiation, Maurice, was not very good, but the most significant thing in the renegotiation was the agreement, the quid pro quo, was that we would do absolutely nothing to block anything designed to create greater harmony within the Eurozone and to block the movements to fiscal and political union. We have given that away, and therefore the entire power generation within the EU is something that we will be unable to stop, assuming Cameron keeps his word. And so I think that it's a beautiful essay, but it is utopian, and utopia doesn't exist.
Okay.
Well, these are very important points, Dominic, and I am very glad that you've made them. Certainly, let's take them in two parts. Firstly, that other people have said, like Tony Blair or like Gordon Brown says now, we should lead. I mean, everyone has seen that. What you've seen on these charts is unheard of. That in 16 years' time, which is not very long, we are going to overtake Germany and be the number one economic power in Europe. This is not moonshine from the spin machine in the Treasury. These are demographic trends which are indisputable. Britain's population will overtake Germany. Our fertility rate is much higher. And I don't know there is nothing that the Germans can possibly do about this unless the German government has some method of increasing sexual activity amongst the German population. It's going to be quite a problem. So, maybe that is the reason. Fine. One way or another, incredibly, we are going to overtake Germany soon. So let's deal with with what you're saying about lead. This is not some sort of platitudinous description about lead in some way. We are going to be the number one economic power. Once you are the number one economic power, exactly the same will happen to us as now happens to Germany, which is that everybody looks up to the number one economic power, and that's how the world is. And it's not going to change, Dominic. So if we can replace them, as I'm suggesting, is going to happen, then we will have what they currently have. Let me deal with your second point, which I fully understand, and people have said to me about this. You can't be serious that we can be the top dog in Europe when we're not in the euro. To which the answer is yes, I do believe that. We are now having a referendum, very bitter referendum, in which there's tremendous arguments on all sides, about Europe. We're not in the euro. So one way or another, whatever it is that goes on in Europe seems to evoke tremendously powerful feelings and policy differences in Britain, even though we're not in the euro. So our relationship with Europe is obviously so enmeshed, whether we're in the euro or whether we're not. So I can't see that not being in the euro is a bar to what the law of gravity and Darwin dictates, which is that those who are in economic power are in charge. That's what's going to happen to us.
Okay, thank you. Can I encourage you to do it in the bar?
Your business is a very busy business. We have 12.6% pointed out. Let's suppose it went up to 15%. If you have 15% of the shares in a company and the other 85% don't agree, you may as well have nothing.
Well, no, again, I take the point. I completely disagree, because in companies there is such a concept as effective control. And effective control doesn't mean 51%. It can be a much lower figure, and usually is. So,
Okay, thank you. I'll encourage you to talk more over drinks. So,
Please.
gentleman in the second row, please, and then Malcolm, and then over there we've got two, and I don't know if anyone over here. Oh, I can't see very well. Has any questions?
I was going to ask a different question, but in view of what has just been said, can I ask two brief ones? First, we've heard about the problem of pensions and company mergers. France and the UK have virtually identical population and everything else, and expectations in their population of pensions. We are backed by about €1 trillion of pension funds. The French is backed by an off-balance sheet liability of the French state. Do we want to merge with that country? Second question is, have we considered the implications of the ultimate collapse of the Eurozone with Greece and a couple of other southern countries, and possibly France, having to leave for economic reasons? And the implications of that, is that a problem or an opportunity? I think the latter.
Thank you. Do you mind handing the intercom to me?
yes, thank you. Those problems you're describing in terms of pensions and all the other problems one can see would be better served by Britain being in charge. We'll do a very good job. The Germans have had a good run. They've done very well, and one is very happy for them. They're not going to begrudge us the handover. They had a good go, and now it's our turn, and so we'll do a great job.
Okay, Malcolm, and I encourage everyone to read Malcolm's paper on Brexit.
Thank you very much, Karen. Malcolm Chalmers, the Deputy Director here. I just wonder whether I could come back to this concept of leadership and being in charge of Europe. And historically, one country after another has tried to be the European hegemon, and one of the key roles of British foreign policy has been to prevent Spain or France or Germany becoming that hegemonic power in Europe. And it may well be, I'm sceptical of your projections, I must confess, a long way in the future, 2035, another 20 years. But even if the UK's GDP in 20 years' time is 5% or 10% bigger than Germany, that doesn't mean that Britain becomes the leader in Europe. Surely the reality of Europe for a very long time in the past and a very long time into the future is that there are a number of powers of roughly equivalent power if you balance all the different indicators of power. And the European challenge, therefore, is how you manage a continent peacefully in that situation of rough equity between France, Germany, and the UK. And that involves a degree of sovereignty sharing and sharing of responsibility, which you don't get in a continent like North America, where there's a natural hegemon which can dictate the agenda. The UK, so when people, I think Dominic Dawson quite rightly pointed to the parallel with Tony Blair, who failed in this respect. But there was a natural limit, and I think he's actually absolutely right in also saying, in relation to the euro and Schengen, if we think today, where are the areas where Germany is exhibiting elements of being hegemonic? It's in those particular areas, Schengen and Euro, from which the UK is absent. But in areas where the UK is present, I think it's more a case of sharing sovereignty and balancing rather than either ourselves or the Germans or anybody else being hegemonic.
Well, I understand completely. I'm not describing hegemony. I'm very happy to accept, and I'm sure the Prime Minister would be very happy to accept, exactly the kind of leadership that Germany now has. That will do fine. Everyone seems to look to Germany as being the leader of Europe. That will do us absolutely fine. And for the same reason. And by the way, on that point about hegemon and how does one know how this will work this way, one must consider that it wasn't very long ago that people first started to say to the world, in relation to a real hegemon, America, people started to say, what was it, 15 years ago, that the first agreement amongst the world economists came around, just like this, to say China is going to overtake America and become the number one economy in the world. It was about 15 years ago. Well, in that 15 years, look at the transformation in the way that people deal with China. It's an extraordinary psychological change. China hasn't overtaken America, but nevertheless it is treated as the power to be. And I can confirm that to you because when the Premier of China came to speak to both Houses of Parliament, as Lord Strathclyde was, many of us were there actually, it was clear to us that when he came to the Royal Gallery and spoke to both Houses of Parliament, we were witnessing a transition of power in the world. No one was in any doubt. And it hasn't happened. It's no more real than what's on that chart. But once it's on that chart, and once people know that that's the case, which they will if they are watching the news this wonderful evening, that's going to make the psychological change I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Claire Foster-Gilbert, Westminster Abbey Institute. Thank you very much, Lord Saatchi. What then is the good towards Britain might lead Europe?
Say that again, Claire, sorry.
What is the good towards which Britain might then lead Europe?
Well, I had a paragraph in here which I hope you liked, which described some great British traditions and great British qualities. And those are what makes Britain totally suitable as the leader of Europe. And I don't see that, as I said, Germany's done a fine job. They've been a good leader for a long time. Very good. Now it's our turn, and we'll show them.
Okay, sir. Oh, Helen, yeah, right there. Yeah, thank you.
Hi there, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Scott. I'm a member of the Institute. Lord Saatchi, I think you were, when you were doing your reflections on the 2005 election, one of the things you said you wished you had convinced the Conservative Party to do was to, if they didn't accept that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I'm interested to...
It's a good line.
Yeah, it's a very good line. And also I'm interested in the fact you said that idealism is a great deal more attractive than pragmatism. But idealism doesn't pay the bills. And I think if the European Union was a company and you went in there to take over that company, the first thing you would do is sack the board because their only recipe is more of the same. And you would then start to rationalise the company. So how do you see us dealing with the intervening 16 years in which you've got to convince a public that doesn't trust any of the people involved in the negotiation or anything else, and particularly from the Remain campaign? How do you convince the public to do that?
I would recommend to the Prime Minister that we copy Germany. And I really do mean copy in terms of having a plan and going for it. And that's what he's supposed to ask the Foreign Secretary to do on the 24th of June. I mean, here's an example. This is Helmut Kohl in 1996. And by the way, most of my German friends, some of whom are here, absolutely deny the premise of this lecture, which is that Germany had a plan. They deny that. They say there never was a plan, and this all just happened. Well, we end up laughing at that point. Helmut Kohl, 1996, I'm quoting, "The future will belong to the Germans when we build the house of Europe." So they knew what they were doing, and their staggering achievement, which I described, about which I think there is almost zero knowledge, although perhaps some in this room full of experts, of the change in voting strength is terribly significant. And that did not come around by accident. They changed the entire voting system in the EU from one country, one vote to one citizen, one vote in the name of democracy. Irresistible, as the Foreign Office knew. There was no way out of that. There was no answer to that. And they were therefore going to have more votes. Well, if what the Germans have taught us so brilliantly is that more citizens means more votes, and more votes means more power, well, that's a great lesson for us. And they've done the job for us. And as you saw on the crossover point, we thank them very much.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. So it's here and then the gentleman in the back, but please be brief.
Yes.
Thank you.
Irina Somerton, a historian with the Institute of Historical Research at the University of London. Lord Saatchi, I wanted to revisit the point that you made interestingly about why in the world does America remain the American government remain so pro-European? It's not a question of pro-European. It's American pragmatism. Sorry, in business, the business of America is business. It's one of the famous sayings.
Sure.
And it also goes to the Anglo-American special relationship, which is real. I remember a conversation I had with a very senior figure in the Foreign Office some years ago, and we were talking, sort of joking, about de Gaulle's statement about Britain being America's Trojan horse had reemerged for some reason. And, I said to him, well, how does the British government feel about it? And he said, we love it. We benefit from it. We get all that American investment, and American products are manufactured in Britain, and it's great, and it enhances our foreign direct investment relationship, which, by the way, is the largest in the world, reciprocal relationship, and so on. And this is why America appears so pro-European. They're not pro-European. I don't think they like the EU all that much, but they love the benefit of having Britain stay in the European Union because it's very advantageous for America.
Well, I so agree, and you may be interested to know that Tim Knox and I had some interesting gatherings, and the chairman of the Chinese Sovereign Wealth Fund, Mr. Jin, who I quoted earlier, did explain to us that I quoted exactly, they would prefer it if Europe was one country with one government. And the reason was more efficiency. We then had the opportunity, Tim Knox and I, to ask, via the Heritage Foundation in Washington, the opinion of the officials in the State Department, not the politicians, the officials in the State Department in Washington. What is your opinion of what Mr. Jin said? One country with one government, that's what China wants. What do you want? To which their answer was, I'm talking about the officials, exactly the same. There you are. So there's no way out of where we are. We're not going to turn over China and America, and all of Europe. It's not going to happen. So there's only one way forward, as clearly set out in this lecture, which is that we have to be in charge. That's the only possible way forward.
Okay, so, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Lord Saatchi, thank you. It was a fascinating lecture, and it's good to hear a speech on Europe which goes beyond one economic cycle at the moment. One question. By 2030, might Europe not be so integrated that actually whether the region of England is the wealthiest or second wealthiest becomes mute? We become a branch office to a series of presidents, commissioners, or whatever, based on continental Europe, who make the key decisions which we implement.
Well, we don't want that, and that's the reason that we have to be more in charge, if not the hegemon, which is clearly not possible. You hear, to your point, all sides in this referendum debate say to us every night on the news, this is a generational question. This is a question that's important to our children and our grandchildren. Well, fine. If people want to look ahead, as both sides seem to do, that's what all this is about. It's only 16 years. This is very, very close. And it's as the brilliant pamphlet I held up earlier says, these are indisputable demographic trends which are unimaginably difficult to alter. The most reliable economic indicators that there are. So there we are.
So we have a very thirsty audience, but do you have time to take one or two more questions?
Well, whatever you think.
Okay,
Should we just do one last question?
Okay, so the last question over here. For you.
You said that in 2032 the Germans won't begrudge us the handover, but this totally fails to recognise that many people would consider that the whole point of the EU, as far as the Germans are concerned, is precisely to gain by peaceful means what they failed twice to gain by war. And what Kohl said in '96, that the future will belong to the Germans when we build the house of Europe. So you seem to have overlooked that issue. And, well, there's a lot of evidence, if you look around the internet, that that is indeed the Germans' objective.
No doubt about it, as we were quoting and as you just re-quoted. Well, so fine, we're rivals with Germany. We're competitors. We're competitors now. Let's compete. The advantage that we're going to have is that on 6/23, did I say? On the 29th of August, we are going to overtake them. That's going to happen. And so if you're the number one economic power, you have a great deal of power. And it's going to happen. So that's, and I can't see that there's very much they can do about it.
Okay, so thank you.
I think Professor Bobbitt.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Philip, please. Can't see you behind the lectern. Last question, really the last question.
Thank you so much for that talk. It was a marvelous talk. I'm just curious about one thing about the statistics from the OECD. Are those demographic and economic projections based on the British staying in the European Union? Because I should think that would have an enormous impact both on demographics and on economic growth.
Well, it's a very good point. And the author of the CPS study is here, but I think he has explained to me that what one might look at when looking at those figures is that somebody might say, well, wait a minute, this is just immigration. All this population increase is just immigration, uncontrolled immigration. Somebody could say that. But the fact is that all those forecasts, Daniel, will you confirm that those forecasts are based on a halving of immigration from the current level of 330,000 to half that, 180,000, isn't it? So the assumptions in those models are of a big decrease in immigration. So the increase in population that you see on those charts, very importantly, is half from the natural British population and only half from immigration. So I hope that answers your question, Philip.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And before we thank Lord Saatchi, I'd like to encourage all the pragmatists and visionaries to join us upstairs in the library for a glass of wine. We're looking forward to the Prime Minister's speech on the day after the referendum and to hearing your words echoed on television.
So am I.
Please join me in thanking Lord Saatchi for a very provocative speech.
Wonderful.